So if you're adding a handle to one of these, I like to punch a hole out so I can line it up on the bottom, and then a couple out of this one so I can line it up on top. And I just find that center mark on the pattern and pick that out, tape that down, and the same with this one. You just line that up. Look at those lines, those gray lines on there, and really get it as straight as you can. It'll be going straight up. And just tape it down, and you'll just punch those out when you punch out all the rest of the stuff. And that's how you add a handle to any of these. Where the holes are going to show, I like to use a stitching chisel. It looks just a little bit cleaner. Wherever the stitches aren't going to show underneath here, since this panel is going on top, I'll use a hole punch. It makes it a little bit easier to sew, and it gives you just a little bit of play. It allows you to line your parts up a little bit easier. Another thing to keep in mind while you're using the stitching chisel is there's an angle that you want to keep it at. A hole punch, you don't got to worry about it. So since the stitching chisel has an alignment, I'm just watching to make sure I really follow that curve. As I'm coming around the curve, I spin this so it matches the curve. Just place it down and take a look to see there's a line across the top of this, and I can kind of see if it's lined up with that outside curve. When I'm cutting curves like this, I like to leave my middle finger down and tip the knife up a little bit higher so you can get a tighter curve. And keep an eye on that blade, make sure its angle is upright and following that curve. And then like here, with my finger down, I can just spin it around, following that curve. Get a nice clean cut. When I do straightaways, I have the knife down at less of an angle, so more of the blade is getting in there. It makes it a little bit easier to get a nice straight cut. So I'll give these a bend. I'll seal them and kind of give them a bend here. And I'll just spray acrylic Resolene on them and then blot the excess off with a sponge here. And I'll actually leave the back unsealed for now. And once it's done, I'll give it a good coat on the inside. That'll really help set that shape as well. And to do the edges, I'll just use a wool dauber that I burnt a lot of the fibers off of, so it's real small. And just hit this edge. And I also hit it on the inside of the edge a little bit, so we don't get like frays and stuff. And there's a good chance you're going to get over the edge onto the good side. So what I'll do is just lay this back out and just tap it with the sponge so it doesn't leave any marks when it dries. And since I did this right away, it's still got that bend to it. Give it a little bit of a bend and set this aside to dry. That'll help since it's already kind of in that shape that we want. This will just make it a lot easier to keep everything lined up while you're sewing. Since you can't sew this flat, the holes wouldn't line up. As this curves around, the holes on this one are spaced a little bit further so that it lines up. If you want to tack down this other side with a little piece of thread, you can. But it's best to start on a corner, that way you know the holes are going to line up. And the patterns will have one marked hole with an X on it, so if you want, while you're punching it, you can mark it on the back side just to make sure you're starting on that right hole. Since these back holes are punched with a hole punch, that's going to make this a lot easier. But I still come through the front side just to guide this needle back, and especially while you're down in there further, it helps to be able to match that angle of this needle so you can follow it right back through. And by coming through the back side first, it's not going to pull leather through to the front side. So once I got all the way around, I'm just going to shoot down this side. And you can see it's a tight fit because this is more like a 6-ounce. I'll work my way all the way down to this hole. Then I'll put this part in around the bottom, and this is what's going to keep the can from coming through the other side. Instead of trying to make a full gusset piece underneath there, this is way easier than trying to do that corner stitch. It can be a little bit tricky to get your hand in here sometimes, so that's another point of putting this needle through. You can match that needle's angle so you can follow it right back through. So I just came up that last hole, and then when I come back through, since this is the bottom, I'm going to come back, I'm going to go through this part as well. Where the seam goes isn't very crucial at all, since it's hidden. I just don't put the seam in the same place. It'll just help it be a little more rounded. And continue on sewing all 3 layers together now. And I'll just go all the way around. You don't want to pull these super tight, but you do want to make sure the stitches get good and snug. When I get towards the center and it's a little harder to reach in there, what I like to do is put this needle in my fingers like this, and then follow this back through. And if you need to look down in there, you can. As I'm pulling it out, I follow right through. And I can't really press with the grip I have, so I'll squeeze this to push the needle through. Once I finish sewing this, I like to put a good coat on the inside where I haven't sealed it yet, and then put a can in here while it dries. Let that soak in for a second. You can see this one held that shape real nice. Just clicks in there. And before you start sewing this together, make sure you know which part is the bottom that gets that extra ring on the inside. These templates will be pointing down towards the bottom, and this one would be like that on the pattern itself. So just make sure the ring is sewn around in there. That way when you put this on, you'll have the points where they need to be. This is just one layer. There's going to be another layer inside of this. When you're doing the handles, you can just punch holes in the inside shorter part. Doesn't really matter all that much. I just start on one side. You're going to put the flesh sides together. When you're sewing the handle, it helps to have a bend in it, since that's the shape it's going to want to go in anyways. And getting towards the end here, what I like to do is keep bending it to get those parts lined up as you're sewing this. So what I did is I started on this hole here, went all the way around, skipped underneath, and came back up. That way there's only one layer of stitches there. And when I got to this end, since this is done and ready to go, I might as well just attach it. I just continue on, attach it to the mug there, and we're going to flip that one inside and attach that side. It's good to make sure you get these real tight. That way you won't have stitches showing. And this is the thinner one. There's a whole separate pattern pack for if you want to do this out of thicker leather, since the measurements will be a little different. If you want this to be firmer, just use the handle from that thicker pattern, and you can put that handle on this thinner one. It's the same template as this, it's just the measurements are a little different for the inside versus the outside part.